Hey y'all, welcome to Peyton Energetics. I'm Peyton, and in today's video, we're going to go off-roading a bit. So if you have listened to any of my videos, you know one thing that I rarely get into is talking about the negative beings. I rarely spend time focusing on the negative agendas, the negative star races, but as you guys know, as we crossed into 2023, we passed into the window for open contact, which means that in the very near future, we're going to be having the opportunity to meet face-to-face with our galactic family. And so for that reason, the guides have been thinking that it was time to start sharing some information about some of the star races that we tend not to focus on quite as much in the spiritual community. And that is the races that we consider to be negatively oriented, or sometimes we call this service to self. So in today's video, the guides are going to talk about one of the races that comes in at the extreme end of negativity, and that is the race that we often refer to as the ancient reptilians, or just the reptilians. Now, this is a race that I have not spoken of very much, although in the spiritual community, we are certainly aware of their existence. In fact, we talk quite a bit about it in the spiritual community. There is a lot of discussion about the reptilians. But today, the guides are going to chat with us a little bit about what this race or races is all about, how they come to have the reputation that they have, and share a little bit about their civilization, where they come from, so that we can just be aware. It is always good for us to know all the different members of our galactic family, even those that we may not choose to interact with. So the reptilians certainly fall in that category. So the guides are going to be sharing some information about them in today's video so that we go into our open contact window with our eyes open. Now, when we talk about the reptilians, we are talking about a race of beings that has a fairly negative reputation in our galactic community, the galactic family. And as one of my channeling teachers once said, it is estimated that about 85% of the reptilian beings in our galaxy are negatively oriented. So there is reason for the reputation that the reptilians have. But it is important, as the guides have been pointing out in many of these videos about the star races, that not all races are one thing. And we have to keep that in mind even when we talk about the reptilians, that not all reptilians are negatively oriented. There are some that are quite benevolent, but this is a race that is very heavily slanted toward what we would call negative orientation, or sometimes we just refer to that as service to self. So this is a race, if we have the opportunity to interact with it, that we want to use our utmost discernment with. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about this race that gets so much chatter in the spiritual community. So according to the guides, the reptilians that we are most familiar with are a group that are often referred to as the draconians or the ancient reptilians. These are the guys that are most famous in the spiritual community. So let's talk a little bit about who these guys actually are. So according to the Pleiadians, and as y'all know, my guide team is primarily Pleiadian and Sirian. So the information that I share with you tends to come from a Pleiadian perspective. And all that means is that if you have guides from another guide system or are channeling other beings, you may get a different version of galactic history. So I always like to share my perspective because, as the Pleiadians like to say, perspective is everything. So the story you get always depends on who is telling it. So according to the Pleiadians, the reptilians in general, as a race, make up about 15 to 20% of the galactic population. So this is a group that is fairly populous. And the reptilians that are most famous, most well known to us, are the group that we refer to as the draconians or the ancient reptilians. And when the guides tell us about the history of the reptilians in our galaxy, They say that this group actually came from another universe. And some sources say that even the reptilians don't know exactly where they came from. So this is an absolutely ancient race, which is one of the reasons why they're often referred to as the ancient reptilians. So this is a group that has been around since pretty much the beginning. Now, the story starts in our galactic history with the reptilians all the way back in the Lyran star system. So the first time the reptilians come on our radar screen as humanoids in this galaxy, according to the Pleiadians, was when the reptilians attacked our forefathers, the ancient Lyrans. And the Lyrans and Vegans were living happily and peacefully in their star system until they were attacked by the ancient reptilians in what was an absolutely catastrophic galactic war. The guides have told us that about 3 planets were completely destroyed in this war, and over 50 million beings died. So this was an absolute catastrophe at the time it occurred. And the result of this is that the original Lyrans and Vegans were driven out of their paradise star system and forced to flee throughout the galaxy. And our galactic history tells us this is what spread human form throughout the galaxy to all of the places that we know it to exist now. And it all started with those reptilians. So apparently it was the reptilians attacking the ancient Lyrans that caused human form to scatter throughout the galaxy. And according to the guides, the ancient reptilians have proceeded to wreak havoc throughout the galaxy pretty much since that time. So according to the Pleiadians, we can consider the ancient reptilians to be the most malevolent race in the galaxy. Now, something that we don't often talk about with the ancient reptilians is their level of evolution. And so what is interesting about the ancient reptilians, given their extreme level of malevolence, is that they are also one of the most advanced races in the galaxy. So according to the guides, the ancient reptilians are high 6th density beings, meaning they are right on that cusp of transitioning into 7th density, which is transitioning back to source, back to light, back to oneness and unity consciousness. So according to the guides, these are some of the most advanced and most evolved, although also most negative, beings in our galaxy. So a lot of times it can take us by surprise. I know it surprised me when I first heard this, that some of the most negative beings in our galaxy are also the highest in dimension, highest in density. It seems something that can kind of easily confuse the human mind. But these beings are extremely, extremely advanced. And the guides have also said about the ancient reptilians that they are consciously holding themselves back from ascending out of 6th density, which is out of physical form, by many explanations of density and dimension, although that does depend very much on what star race you are talking to. But many star races say as you move out of 6th density, you move out of physical form. And so the guides have said that the ancient reptilians are holding themselves in quasi-physical form because they don't want to merge into the light. They don't want to be reunited with source. So they are deliberately holding themselves back from ascending. So when we talk about the reptilians, this is something that can often put humans into fear. And especially when we hear about the role the reptilians have played on planet Earth, this is something that can really be a fearful topic for a lot of people in the spiritual community. So one thing that the guides wanted us to understand about really any negatively oriented race is the guides like to say they cannot touch you unless you fear them, you hate them, or you believe they have power over you. They said it is possible for you to exist in a reality totally separate from them unless you do one of those 3 things. So if we are in fear of negatively oriented beings, if we hate them, if we see what they are doing and we respond to their actions with hatred, or if we think they have control over us, the guides say that is the only way these beings can touch you. So they say it is very possible to exist in a reality that is free of beings like this, and it all comes down to you. Can you exist without hating them, judging them, being fearful of them, or giving them your power? So the guides always like to point out in any discussion about any race that we would consider to be negatively oriented, that it doesn't mean that they have to be in your experience. So this is very important to remember, especially when we talk about the reptilians, because it is definitely a topic that can put humans in a little bit of fear. Now, when we talk about reptilians, all reptilians are not the same. We are going to talk very generally about them in today's video, but the guides like to say that there are different categories of reptilians. So even when we are focusing on the more negatively oriented members of the gang, they're not all exactly the same. So according to the guides, the reptilians separate themselves into certain categories. And there are two categories that are most relevant for humans to know about. The first is what we sometimes refer to as the dragon caste. So the word caste or group is often used when we talk about reptilians. So at the top of the reptilian food chain, so to speak, is the dragon beings. And these beings are said to be over 30 feet tall, to breathe fire, everything that we have seen in our movies, and to be the top of the chain in the reptilian pecking order. Now, interestingly, when we talk about the dragons, the guides often say that the dragons tend to be fairly neutral. So these are not a group of reptilians that we would put in necessarily the negatively oriented spectrum. They are more, according to the guides, what we would consider to be neutral, sticking to themselves, tending to their business, and not out to do some of the troublemaking that some of the other groups of reptilians are so fond of. So when we think about the dragons, the guides say these are at the top of the reptilian food chain. They are the most prestigious members of reptilian society, and they tend to be quite neutral. And the guides have even said that many of the dragon beings are actually acting to keep in check some of the troublemaker members of the reptilians. So those extremely negatively oriented reptilians who have been wreaking havoc throughout the galaxy, according to the guides, the dragons are now helping to keep those troublemakers in check. So we may consider the dragons to be fairly neutral from our perspective. We would not put them in the negative orientation category that we do so many of the reptilian species, but the dragons do tend to act as enforcers or overseers of some of the lower levels of reptilian. And the second group of reptilians is the one that we are most familiar with and that we're focusing on in today's video. And these are the ones who we know in the spiritual community as being the real troublemakers in the galaxy. So these are what is often referred to as the warrior caste of the reptilians. And these are the ones where the real trouble lies. So this is the group of reptilians that have caused so much chaos and destruction and war throughout the galaxy. And the chaos that was being caused by these reptilian beings was one of the reasons that Earth was placed in the 3D bubble, in the hologram. The guides say one of the reasons for this was to quarantine some of these troublemaker races on the planet. So we here on Earth have a very close connection to the reptilians and have had quite a bit of presence of them on this planet. So this is the warrior caste of the reptilians that tend to be what we consider to be the most negatively oriented beings that we are familiar with. So we call these the warrior caste, and the dragon beings are helping in part to keep them in check. But these are the beings who have really caused chaos and destruction pretty much throughout the galaxy as long as they have been here. Now, an interesting thing is happening within the warrior caste, even of the most negatively oriented of the reptilians. And the guides say that there is starting to be a split amongst this group of reptilians where some of them are getting tired of the negativity and are ready to ascend, to move on into non-physical. And so we're starting to see, according to the guides, a splitting of this category that has been such trouble in the galaxy, where some are saying this game is played out. So although this is still a group that has a very negative reputation and well-earned, we're starting to see the tide turning. Now, this doesn't mean that we should be frivolous and carefree in interacting with these beings. We still want to use absolute discernment anytime we're working with any star being. But the guides have said that the tide is starting to slowly change, and some of even the warrior reptilians are getting tired of the negativity game. Now, when we talk about the warrior reptilians, the guides say that these are reptilian beings that, in their physical form, although they are expert shapeshifters, are about 12 feet tall. So this is a very large being that we are talking about. And the guides say that this is a race that feeds off fear. So this is how they sustain themselves and keep themselves in quasi-physical form, is by feeding off of fear. So the guides have considered that the warrior caste of the reptilians, as I mentioned, to be on the most extreme end of negativity. And because of that, this is a group that the guides say has little to no respect for any member who is not of their kind. So they may have utmost love and respect for other reptilians, but have almost none for any other life form. And the reptilians that we are talking about are found all throughout the galaxy. So this is a group that travels often in ships that are described as looking like spiky artichokes, and they are often black in color. So this may be a sign of a reptilian craft. And this is a group that is very prolific throughout the galaxy and has caused trouble in almost every corner of the galaxy. And the ships of the reptilians are quite large. The guides have said that they can be several miles wide. And that is so boggling to the human mind to think of a ship or a craft that is several miles wide. So these are beings who are expert at interstellar travel. And again, as we mentioned, they're some of the most advanced races in the galaxy. And while the reptilians are found all throughout the galaxy, they are known to have a very heavy presence in the Orion system. Because as we talked about in the Orion video, the Orion Empire that had such a reputation for darkness in the galaxy was led by the ancient reptilians, by the negatively oriented reptilians. So they have a very strong presence in the Orion constellation, but are really found everywhere throughout the galaxy. And the reptilians caused such chaos and havoc throughout the galaxy that it is said that the Galactic Federation was actually formed in response to their attacks. So it was formed to create a coalition of benevolent races who were committed to making sure that the kind of destruction that had happened in the Lyran system didn't happen again. So this is a group that has just caused chaos and destruction everywhere they have been. But although they are known as being quite fearless, quite aggressive, quite dominant, they are said to actually fear certain of the benevolent races. And the guides put the Arcturians on that list and also the advanced feline races. So the reptilians are said to steer clear of certain of the more advanced benevolent races in our galaxy and to actually fear them. So when we talk about the reptilians, they have a very spicy role in galactic history. They seem to be at the forefront of all of the drama, or at least a good part of it, that has occurred throughout our galactic history, and take responsibility for a lot of the darkness and devastation that has happened in our galactic history. So this is a race that it is very helpful to be aware of, because as we become galactic citizens, as we become multidimensional, we need to know who we are dealing with. And one of the things that has kind of bit us on the butt as Earth humans is we have been in a practice of believing what we are told at face value. But as we move into the galactic family, we have to start being more discerning, because just like we have lovely humans and humans that are not so lovely, the same thing exists in our galactic family. And the reptilians are one example of that. So I hope this has helped you get to understand the reptilians a little better, understand how they have come by the reputation that they have, and just help to open your eyes. But as the guides always tell us, there is no need for us to fear them. When we fear them, we give them our power, and that is what they feed off of. So the guides always encourage us with any being to stand in our sovereignty, to know that nothing can harm you or overpower you unless you give it that power. So the guides are encouraging us to stand in our sovereignty as we move into the window for open contact. So I hope this has helped you get to know the reptilians a little bit. And let me know in the comments below, what other star races do you want to know about? Drop that in the comment box below. And while you're down there, don't forget, hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't done that yet. I'll see you soon. Bye.